the first question just to get the ball rolling after Karma introduces herself and everything. But my question would be, chronologically, when you were younger, say in your youth and teens and high school, did you have that drive to write? Were you a big reader? Did it come naturally, or did it hit you later in life? Was there something that, or was it something you've always enjoyed? That's sort of my question I'll throw out, and then we'll carry on from there.
Okay, do you want me to start with that question? I'll start now.
Yes, and obviously welcome Kamra Brown.
Thank you for having me. I know that we were supposed to do this in person, and I'm sorry that I can't be there in person. It is more fun in person. As much as this is a great way to be able to do it, it is really nice to see people, and hopefully maybe the next book I have out, I can come back and we will be past this stage of things, and then we can meet in person. But thank you for having me, and thanks everyone for being here. Please ask questions, and so that I will ramble. I can do that for a long time, but I'm very happy to answer any and all questions about writing and my books. And I mean, you can try anything. I'm not an expert in most things, but willing to give it, a shot. As for the writing question, if I wanted to be a writer, no, in fact, I would quite clearly did not want to be a writer. And I went to journalism school. I wanted to be a news anchor. That was my dream sort of from the time that I was a teen. I was a huge reader as a child, still am. I read constantly, under the covers at night, just anything I could get my hands on, I would read. I'm still like that. But for some reason, it never occurred to me that I could be a writer. I don't know why. It just wasn't something I considered. So I wanted to be a news anchor, and I eventually ended up going to journalism school. I did an undergrad in something else first, and then worked for a few years. And then I went to journalism school in my late 20s, late 20s. It feels like a long time ago, even though at the time I felt old to be there because I was doing a master's, but everyone was straight out of their undergrad. So I was like the oldest one in my class at 27 or something like that. And in journalism school, I had a lot of questions about, well, did I want to work at newspapers? And I would always say, no, I don't want to write. I'm learning to write for those mediums, but I don't want to write. And here I am. So, between that time and this time, a few critical things happened. I was diagnosed with cancer when I was 30, which was my very last day of journalism school, actually. And so that changed a lot of things for me, my perspectives, the priorities that I had. And I just went in a different direction and decided I didn't want to go to Northern Canada to try to make my broadcast career work. So I just shifted and pivoted, and I started writing for magazines, which I really learned that I love to do. And I freelanced for a number of years for a lot of different publications, mostly in lifestyle, niche, parenting type stories. And then I just thought maybe I'd try writing a novel because, as I've said many times before, I just had this thought, how different could it be from, aside from being much longer than a magazine article. And that's so totally different. But I stumbled along with that first book, which sits in a drawer now, along with my second book, and realized how much I loved writing fiction, really loved it. And so I just sort of kept going. And I thought, well, I'd like to get a book published, so I'll just keep writing until that happens. And now I'm a writer somehow. So I published my first book at 41. So it's the career of the second half of my life. So, but it's fun. It's great.
Thanks for that. Actually, I'll maybe throw it out to Beth to see if she has a question, and then we can encourage people to use the chat box for questions. Oh, and here's one right now. So let's just have a look at what that. Have you made any of the 1950s recipes in Recipe for a Perfect Wife? Some sound delicious, some sound downright weird.
Yes, I have made a number of them. So I don't know how many people have read the book or even opened it. There in the book, it's about two women in two different time eras, one in the 1950s and one in 2018. And they are living in the same house, just these 60 years apart. And the modern day woman discovers this cookbook that was left behind by the 1950s housewife, who on the surface appeared to have quite a, just a quintessential housewife, 1950s housewife life. And really within the pages of that cookbook, and then in some other things that she found, this modern day woman found that were left behind, she realized that this housewife had some secrets and had a different life than what appeared on the surface. So this cookbook is sort of like a talisman that comes from the 1950s and lives in the modern day. You see it in both eras. And in the book, in the 1950s housewife chapters, because I alternate between these two women, there's a recipe at the beginning of every one of her chapters. And they are vintage, and a lot of them are disgusting. And so I chose not to make, there were a few things. There's a dip that I think Jennifer might be referring to, because I something on Twitter today. There's a dip that has like whipped cream and ham, and I can't even remember what else is in it. Onion juice. There's some, or peas. I can't remember. I'm mixing up recipes now, but it's called Hollywood Dunk, and I did not try that one. But yeah, it was fun. My daughter and I made the baked Alaska, which is another one of the recipes in the book, which is just it's ice cream really that sits on a cake base, and then you cover it in meringue and you bake it. So that was fun to do. But yeah, some of them, there were a lot of casseroles and a lot of Jell-O molds from those days. And I will say, the books, just while we're on the topic of recipes, so this was the book, and some people may recognize this cookbook. It's the Purity Flour Cookbook. It was put out in the 1940s by the Purity Flour Company, which is a Canadian company. And this one was my stepmom's, actually, Brenda, but she kindly gave to me. But the cookbook in Recipe for a Perfect Wife is really based off of this book. And some of the recipes are directly from this book. I also took some recipes from the Betty Crocker cookbook, which again,
I have that one. I have that one.
Okay. There's also housewife tips in this one, which I found particularly funny. Like if you're feeling tired, to just lie down on the floor for a few minutes until you feel better, and then get up and carry on with your vacuuming. So this was my mom's book. She was given it, I believe, for her wedding shower. So I have this love of vintage cookbooks, and that's really where the book started from. I wanted to just dive into that era, into the 1950s, but I needed a way to get in. And I really desperately wanted to use this idea of these cookbooks that really tell a story, that become a legacy for women, for families, that get passed along. And because I love, the nostalgia that's in these books for me. I love the little notes that are made in the corners to think about what recipes were being made and what was happening in a family's life at that time. So that was what inspired the idea of the cookbook for the story. And then I've just talked nonstop now for 5 minutes, but it's okay. Well, we can go to the next question if there is one.
Yes, the questions are pouring in now. Did you have a strong desire to be a wife and a mother like Nelly in the book, or were you more career driven like Alice?
I would say that I probably was more like Alice. My sister wanted to have 100 babies and live with my mom forever. That was her goal as a child. She did not have 100 babies and does not live with my mother still. But I was really interested in having a career. I wanted to be a journalist. There was a point where I wanted to be a war correspondent, which now, knowing who I am now, I can't imagine that I ever felt that way, but I'm not a risk taker anymore. But I love being a mother, but I love being a wife, but there's a lot more to my life than that. And I always felt very clearly that I wanted to have a career that was that was just for me. So yeah, I don't think I had a strong desire the same way Nelly did. I'm sort of between the two of them, to be honest.
Okay, so I have eaten baked Alaska, and it has always been a mystery how the ice cream didn't melt. So that was sort of a comment. And then we'll go to the next question. Nancy asked, can you please tell us more about methods of publishing your book? For example, the difference between self-publishing companies versus publishing houses. Good question.
Sure. Yeah, so if you're traditionally published, it means that a publisher has acquired your book, so they bought your book, and they put in the work and the money in terms of marketing and promotion, cover design, distribution, sales, all of that. So they take on all of that work, which is significant. And then you get your book on a shelf in Chapters or, you know, Barnes and Noble in the States, wherever it is, independent bookstores, which shout out to independent bookstores. Please try to buy your books there. They are amazing. Or visit the library and check books out. Authors get paid for books that are taken out of the library. So there's a program in Canada that we do get paid for that. So, you know, when you check a book out, the author is getting paid. But from a traditional, if you're traditionally published, it means that you have a publisher, they have bought your book, they have taken on the ownership of all the work that goes into getting that book out to readers. If you're self-published, you have taken on that work. So you're doing the editing, you're doing the cover design, you're doing distribution, which is usually done through Amazon, all the promotion, you take that all on yourself. If you self-publish, you keep your money, most of it, that you make off of a book. So whatever the sale price is. If you are traditionally published, you get a percentage of the amount that a reader would pay for the book. And it is tiny for traditionally published authors. But the traditionally published, like the publishers, the big publishers have a big network. And so they can get books out in ways that would be very difficult for someone who is self-published. So, you know, those are the two big differences between working with a publishing house and doing it self-publishing on your own. When I was going through the process, I really wanted to be self-published, or not self-published, I wanted to be traditionally published. I wanted to see my book on the shelf at Chapters. And I also did not want to do the marketing and promotion. And now, 6 books later, I'm even more sure that I never want to do that part of it because, as I said, it is so much work. And some people are great at it and they really want to take that on. But it's, you know, you can't really write another book while you're also trying to promote and publish, get your self-published book out. It's tricky. So did that answer the question? I hope so. Those are the two main methods.
Yeah, that was great. Okay, so there's sort of 2 in a row that are similar. What inspiration from your own life when you're writing books, sort of relating to what, could you please talk about how you created your characters? Was there anyone that inspired you for Nelly and Alice? So those are sort of similar.
Inspiration from my own life, I'm certain that I do take lots of little nuggets from my own life. I know that in Recipe for a Perfect Wife, there is a scene at the beginning where Alice is the modern day character. She's quite irritated that Nate, her husband, has used her gold-plated tweezers to pluck his nose hairs. And my husband will be delighted that I'm telling you all that that is a true life, like ripped from the headline story of my own house, where I was irritated that he was using my tweezers for his nose hairs. So I bought him his own tweezers. But, you know, so there are some little things like that that are in there, things that I'm curious about, things I spend a lot of time being quiet when I'm out in the world, less so now because obviously we're all at home. But I spend a lot of time in coffee shops, in libraries, just sitting somewhere with my notebook, listening, just eavesdropping on what people are saying. It's amazing the different things that you learn and hear and ideas that you get. So that, yeah, I guess that could be inspiration from my own life, but I'm borrowing from other people's lives. So always remember that there may be an author sitting nearby listening to your conversation and hoping to find some tidbit that they can throw into their book. About the characters, with Nelly and Alice, I really don't base any of my characters on people I know. They are a combination maybe of some characteristics of people who I know, but then they really do become their own people. I give them hobbies, I give them birthdays, I give them childhood pets. And so they are real people to me, and not really based on anyone I know. I mean, there are elements of Alice that are like me, and there are elements of Nelly that are like me. My mom's probably in there somewhere a little bit, my grandmother, but yeah, for the most part, they're just, the character is created to suit the story. With Nelly, she was the first character that I thought of with this book, and I had this vision of her sitting in her garden, in her dungarees, after having been gardening a little bit, with her cigarette and her cookbook, and thinking about what she was going to cook for her husband when he came home. And I had such a clear picture of her, and I thought, well, she just, she's young, she's happy, she's doing, living this life that she had wanted and had expected. But I knew there was something else underneath the surface with her. And then it was the fun part of like, okay, what is not being told by this picture that I have of her sitting here in her garden. So, Nelly really started this story for me. And I was able to incorporate the cookbook, obviously, and just go from there.
Thank you. Okay, Jennifer asks, how different is it to write and publish fiction versus nonfiction? And maybe we can touch on a little bit on 4% Fix that I haven't read that one yet, but I plan on it. I've just finished Recipe for a Perfect Wife and loved it, but I love nonfiction, so I'm looking forward to reading that as well.
Yes, it is in the wellness category. I've learned all these things about nonfiction now. This is, let me just grab it. This is the 4% Fix. It's my first nonfiction book. And so the way this book came to be, before I answer how different they are, because they are very different, but I get up early to write my books. And I generally am a 5 a.m. riser. I've been doing it for maybe 10 years now, not because I thought that would be a great idea. It was because my daughter was, as a baby, never slept and would get up at 3:30 or 4, and I had to get up with her. So eventually, once I realized I could set her up with some Play-Doh and Dora the Explorer and whatever else we had going on, that I could eke out a little bit of time for myself, I started writing. And what happened is that over the year, I wrote books, and then another book, and then my daughter started finally sleeping in, but I didn't sleep in anymore. So I just stuck with the habit. So HarperCollins Canada had said, well, would you like to, we would like you to write a book for us about this, about getting up early to do this thing that you've always wanted to do but didn't think you'd have the time for. And would you be interested in doing that? And in my experience, when a publisher says, hey, we would like you to write this book for us, and we have a check for you to do that, then you say, yes, I will do that. And then I'll figure out how to do that. Because, I had joked with my dad, who is on this call, hi Dad, that it was going to be a very short book, because the reality is that if you want to get up early to do something meaningful for you that you didn't think you'd have the time to do before, the only way to do it is to set your alarm early and put your feet on the floor and get up to do that thing. But, setting an alarm is not enough to fill a whole book. So I had to really go a little deeper and look at all the elements that are involved in that, around goal setting and, thinking about sleep and thinking about, why you want to get up and what your priorities are in a day. So that's what the 4% Fix is about. And it was really different to write. Interestingly, this is the first book of mine that I have not been able to write at 5 a.m. So it's a book about getting up at 5 a.m. to do this thing, to find that magic hour for yourself, and it refused to be written at 5 a.m. I think I understand why. You know, for me, when I get up early to write, and I know that's my job, but the writing, the actual creative piece of it, does not feel like work. And I view that as something quite different from the other elements of my job, of being an author. And so in the morning when I wake up, I'm not answering emails, I'm not working on Q&As, I'm just writing, and I'm in my world building and with my characters, and it's fun, and it feels very free and creative and exciting. And this book was more like journalism writing. So it required more fact finding, and I had to do interviews and transcribe those, and I'd be looking up studies. And so that didn't have that same creative flow for me. So I found that I had to do that work during the day. I couldn't do it in the morning. So yeah, they're just very different things. And I had the journalism experience, so I know how to write nonfiction. It was trying to do it in a storyteller way. It was challenging at times, and I longed to just be in a place where I could make everything up. I mean, I really got a great appreciation for my fiction at that point, where even though I write some historical fiction, and there are pieces of that you have to pay attention to in terms of getting the details right, there's just something amazing about being able to create a world and create the people who live in it, and you get to decide what they're doing and why and how. So I did also learn, I think fiction is my passion for sure, but it was a good experience. I'm glad that I had the opportunity to do it.
Great, thanks. Eva asks, may I ask you how you found your agent, if you have one, and your publisher, which I believe is HarperCollins?
Actually, no. So HarperCollins, I have had a few publishers. HarperCollins is my publisher for the 4% Fix. Penguin is my publisher. Penguin Random House is my publisher for Recipe for a Perfect Wife and my fiction going forward. And my other 4 books that I had written prior to Recipe for a Perfect Wife were with Harlequin HarperCollins. But I was writing emotional women's fiction for them, and Recipe for a Perfect Wife is a different type of book. And so I left and went to a different publisher for that book. And that's something that happens pretty commonly in the industry. So in terms of how you get an agent, I do have an agent. If you want to be traditionally published, you do need an agent because they really are your gatekeeper to the publisher. So the same way that you're pitching your book to an agent to hopefully get representation from them, they're then pitching your book to the editors at the publishing houses, hoping that they want to buy it and then publish the book. So I found my agent by querying, which is essentially sending out a 300-word, 1-page description and a pitch really for the book. And your only goal with that pitch is to try to get the agent interested to read some of the pages in your manuscript. And then, fingers crossed, hopefully that they decide to represent you. And it was, I queried 2 different books before I found my agent. I think I probably had 140 rejections before I found her, but she read and offered within 24 hours. We didn't sell that book that she offered on, but I was writing another one because I have a always be writing thing where I'm like, okay, that's the only thing I can control and it's the thing I love, so I'll just always be writing. So that 3rd book was the one that became my debut. And then my editor, we found via my agent. So that's how that works. It's a whole complex system behind when you pull back the curtain, for sure.
Okay, Jennifer asks, do you create and follow an outline, create scenes, develop characters, etc. before you write a book? Or do you just write and let it flow and edit later?
I do an outline, and I do a lot of work on developing my characters and thinking about scenes. I do something called a synopsis, which is mine are usually around 8 to 10 pages long, and it is not quite a play-by-play, but pretty close of what the main plot points that are happening through a story, what I think a lot about because this interesting thing about writing a novel is that you're really psyched at the beginning and you have lots of great ideas and you may know your ending and you know exactly where you need to end up, but the murky middle is very tricky. And that's the place where you often will lose readers. It's that point in a book where you feel the energy drop and you're like, okay, I need to get through a few more pages so I can start to feel the climax energy coming. So I now spend a lot of time trying to figure out what's happening in that murky middle, because it's a terrible thing to get to that place when you're actually writing and then not really know what's happening and you're only half finished the book and you think, uh-oh, how am I getting where I need to be without, how do I get there? So I do some outlining, I do a lot of character planning, I do a bunch of research. And then as soon as I start feeling myself getting antsy, I will start actually writing. And I write in a software program called Scrivener, which is sort of like an online corkboard. So I can see all my scenes, I can see all the chapters, and I can move stuff around online. I can copy and paste in web links, pictures, other things that I need from my research, and it's amazing. It has a bit of a learning curve, but if anyone out there is serious about writing a novel, definitely look up Scrivener because it just gives you a lot more flexibility and freedom. I edit later in Word, but I do all of my drafting in Scrivener. And I don't edit as I write because that's a great procrastination tool. I've learned that that's a great way to procrastinate. When you're rereading everything, then it takes all the time away from writing. So I just write that first draft and then knowing I can go back and fix everything. Because a book that you would read on the shelf has been edited. I mean, like I think Recipe I edited for a year between my two editors. And we went back and forth maybe 5 times or 6 times. Like it's pretty intense and significant. So that first draft, it doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be on the page.
Great, thank you. Diane has a question. A lot of creative people I know are saying the pandemic has changed the way they think and create or don't create. Has the pandemic had any effect on your creative process?
Yes, so luckily, I will say that it hasn't really impacted my ability to write. I wrote 3 books last year. I finished 2 and wrote a whole other book last year, like during the pandemic, because I'm co-writing a holiday rom-com. That's a whole other story under a pen name with a good author friend of mine. So that was happening all at the same time as I had 4% Fix. And then I was working on the book that's coming up after Recipe for a Perfect Wife. The way that the pandemic has actually totally messed with my creativity is with my reading. I have not been able to read the way that I did before. And it's so sad because reading is my number one thing. And I don't know if that's happened to anyone else, but I can only read horror and short stories. And I prefer short stories that are horror. So I don't know if it's just that, I can't pick up a big, thick book anymore. I definitely can't read anything that's emotional or, people will say, it made me cry. I find thrillers get me too worked up, but horror somehow, because it's just so unbelievably bad, this terrible thing that's happening or this really scary thing, it feels like it will never happen here. I mean, who knows what's coming next year? Maybe some of these horror things I'm reading are going to, start to feel more like real life, and then I'll have to go back to something else. But yeah, so for me, that it has messed with that, and I hope it comes back. But for now, I'm just reading a lot of Shirley Jackson and rereading Stephen King and Paul Tremblay and Mexican Gothic. If anyone's into horror and Gothic literary horror in particular, Mexican Gothic was fantastic. She's Canadian also, the author. So yeah, okay, that's the last question, right? I'm in the chat box too. I'm just looking.
Okay. I actually have a question.
Yeah.
If that's
Of course.
I feel like I read this or something that Recipe for a Perfect Wife was you sold the movie rights. Is that correct, or
Yes.
am I imagining?
Nope, that's right.
Can you say how that process happened and when we could actually expect to see it?
Well, I mean, okay, so here's what I say about movie rights. They're lovely to sell, and the chance that Recipe gets made into a movie that we can all sit down and watch is about equivalent to me finding a unicorn in my backyard, which is fine. I mean, that's maybe I will find a unicorn in my backyard one day, and maybe Recipe will be made into a movie. It's just, if book publishing is complicated, then TV and film is, I really have not gone too deeply into it because it's a whole other beast and I don't have the brain space or the bandwidth for that. Basically what happens is it gets, like, Recipe was bought, optioned is how they call it. So they're almost like renting the idea for a number of years, and they pay you for the right to have that idea for those years. And then they write a screenplay, if that's what they're planning to do, and then they try to sell that. And maybe something happens and maybe it doesn't. And if it doesn't, after a number of years, the rights revert back to me and then we can sell it again. So that's kind of how the movie optioning works. And it does, the director who bought it did have a screenwriter attached to it. So, but I mean, who knows what's happening? They've had it, I mean, they're working on a screenplay, so maybe. And I have no idea who I would have play anyone, because I don't think of my characters like that. I don't have really clear visions of what they look like. So people are always like, well, who would you want to play Nelly? Who would you want to play Alice? I really don't know. But if anyone has ideas, put it in the chat box. I'm totally interested, because it's not, that's not a skill I have. So yeah, that's the movie, right? So it's fun, it's exciting. It's just, you never know what's going to happen.
I see a comment, Mexican Gothic is a part of the Evergreen nominees this year. It's like super popular at our library, and
it's so good.
Such a good
if you like Gothic horror. I mean, it is pretty different. There's a lot of crazy things that happen in that book, but it's great. It's good. Yeah.
And someone's asked, Jennifer has asked, what are you working on next?
I have another dual narrative, like Recipe. It is set in 1975 and 2019, and it is in the second wave of feminism for 1975. It's set in the Adirondacks. So once again, my two characters, my two women, are sort of isolated. In 1975, this woman, her name is Eddie, she's running a great camp in the Adirondacks, and she runs these workshops, these wild women weekend workshops, so that women can come and just have the experience of being women and being women together and finding their wild side. And it's all about, who she was before she came to run this camp, and why she's doing this and what's important to her. And then in my modern day character, it's a woman and her fiance who come to this cabin in the woods for a month for one reason, and then end up they discover something while they're there, which is again connected to the 1975 storyline. And it totally changes their relationship. It changes what's happening with her. So there are a lot of similar themes for me with that book, in terms of agency for women and having a voice and ambition. Are we allowed to have ambition? What does that look like? What did it look like in 1975? What does it look like in 2019? So it's been fun. It's written. I'm editing it right now, but it will be out in 2023, which I know it feels like a long time from now, very early. And it's called What Wild Women Do. So I'm very excited about that one. But yeah, so I get to work on it for 2 years before it comes out, but that's good. That gives me lots of time. Yeah, so that's what I'm working on right now.
That's great. I love the dual narrative back and forth.
Yeah.
I love that format. Okay, the next question. Of all of your books, which would you say was the hardest to write? Why? And which would you say was the easiest, and why?
So the 4% Fix was the hardest to write. I think because there's so much of me in this book. I really, there's a lot of my personal experience and just aspects of my life. And so in some ways, it's my most personal book because that's all just there. I'm not creating a character, it's me. So that it was hard for that reason. The easiest to write, I don't know. I think from a first draft perspective, probably Recipe for a Perfect Wife. It just all came out. It changed a lot through edits, but that was just a joy to write that book. So I loved writing that one.
Okay, we're getting some votes coming in for the characters for your new
Great.
screenplay. So we've got Emma Stone. I
Okay.
think there were 2 votes for Emma Stone for Nelly.
Yeah.
And someone has said that hello Sunshine Book Club. So hopefully Reese Witherspoon has her eyes on it.
That would actually be a dream come true. Reese Witherspoon is pretty much a golden ticket. So yeah, we'll just all cross our fingers then. That would be great.
That's right. And then I have a comment, 4% was excellent, would love more nonfiction. I guess it's challenging, but they like more. Any other questions?
Well, I don't know what I would say. I mean, I feel like I said everything I have to say about anything in the 4% fix, which isn't saying a lot when it's only really, I mean, it's not even that thick. So if I've said everything I need to say, then, well, I don't know. I need to get some new experiences and stories maybe. But I never say never. That's what that's my new motto. Never say never. So we'll see. We'll see.
Okay, so another question came in. Eva, did you query American agents or just Canadian?
I queried both, and I ended up choosing a Canadian agent because I really wanted to be able to have someone, first of all, I wanted someone who could help me build my career in Canada. And, really just someone who understood the publishing field here, because it is quite different from the US. And, the types of books that Canadians like to read are different from the books in the US to some degree. So I did have my choice. I had a couple of different offers. So what's interesting is that I queried for all this time. I had 100 plus rejections, and then my agent offered, and then I got 2 more offers within 2 days, right? So it's like all of a sudden everything starts to happen. And one of those agents was American, but ultimately, I really wanted an agent who I could go and meet downtown Toronto and have a coffee with, and we could brainstorm things together. And my agent's been amazing that way. We do that all the time, or we did pre-COVID. We will again. So yeah, that was a purposeful decision for me.
And there's a question, can you please tell us more about Holiday Rom-Com?
Oh yes, our holiday rom-com. Okay, so Marissa Stapley, who has written a number of books, and her most recent is coming out in April. It's called Lucky. It's a great book about a grifter, a woman who wins a massive lottery ticket but can't use it because she's on the run. So it's fun and exciting and interesting. But Marissa is someone I've known for years, and 2 years ago, it was just before Christmas, and I was gearing up to promote Recipe for a Perfect Wife, and she was in the depths of her edits trying to write her current book. And I just said to her, why don't we switch? Like, it would be great if we could switch. I'd like to get in there and do some edits, and then you can come and do my PR stuff. Because I'm an introvert, she's an extrovert. We had this whole plan. And then we thought, well, it would be so nice to just share this process with someone so you're not kind of in the isolation tank alone at all these different steps. And wouldn't it be fun if we wrote a book together? Well, that would be fun. Well, what would we write? And so then we sort of joking back and forth, well, what would we write? And then we said, well, we love holiday rom-coms. It was right before Christmas, so all the Hallmark movies were coming out. I was wrapping presents, watching these. And we were like, those make people happy. They make us happy. Like, maybe we should write a holiday rom-com. And we've never written romance. Marissa and I do not write those happy kind of books. But then we thought, okay, well, sure. And what started out as just it wasn't a joke exactly, but it was this is one way that we could, not be so alone while we're doing this. Then suddenly we had an idea, and then we wrote it, and then we sold it, and then it's coming out in October. So it's called The Holiday Swap, and it is our pen name is Maggie Knox, and it's a story about two identical twins. One lives in LA. She is a chef on a reality cooking show, and the other one lives in their small, charming, Christmassy town in the snowy mountains. And they have to swap lives for the 2 weeks prior to Christmas because of something that's happened in LA. And so they have to take over each other's lives. And of course they meet some dashing men, and there's lots of Christmas cheer, and it was very fun. So that's the holiday rom-com. And then we have another one coming out next year.
Hey, well, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Nora asks, has the pandemic affected your morning ritual? Your creative ability to write fiction seems like your inability to read the types of books you used to read may have affected you adversely.
It hasn't really affected my morning ritual. Like, I feel like I'm still going to bed earlier, getting up earlier. I think it helped that I had a lot of deadlines. I mean, I'm just in one of those harvest times with my books where I just have a lot of books due, a lot of deadlines. And if you miss a deadline with the book, it causes a lot of problems down the line. So you really need to try not to miss your deadline. So I think, from that, like from the ability, my ability to do my job, initially it was obviously hard, as it was for everyone, because there was a lot of fear. But then I just got back into the rhythm of the habit. And I think I have such a habit of getting up early and getting to my book, like to the writing of it, that it didn't really stop for me. In terms of the reading, yeah, I don't know if I'm not sure that's affected my ability to write, because I am still reading, I'm just choosing different things. Interestingly, when I handed this most recent draft in, my editors were like, this is pretty dark. And I said, we'll lighten it up in edits. It's okay. But I think it was all the horror that I was reading was like, like let's get some ghosts in there maybe, and some other bad stuff, scary stuff that's happening. So some of it will get to stay, but I did go a little too far. So maybe it did affect me. I don't know.
And Jennifer has a question. What was the best advice you received about becoming an author? I like that question.
Well, that's a tough one, because I didn't know any authors when I became an author. And I didn't call myself an author, like really, until my second book was published. I don't know why. I just had this thing where I just couldn't call myself an author. And my agent kept saying, you are an author. You have a book on the shelf. You are now an author. The best advice, I don't know. I can't even think of it. Probably the best piece of advice I got after becoming an author was not to read my reviews, which I don't do unless people tag me on them. And sometimes they're not nice. And I'm always like, why are you tagging me on a mean 1-star review? Like, I don't need to see that. But people are funny that way. So I would say, don't read the reviews. The reviews are for readers, and they're important. And that's a world that you don't need to participate in as an author with your own book. And also just to read a lot is the other thing. And to know maybe what you want. If you want to be published, like how you want to be published, and then learn everything you can about it. But yeah, don't read your reviews. That's the advice I give people now.
That's good advice. Mary asks, do you ever find yourself randomly thinking about your characters from books previously written?
Yes, all the time. They are real people to me. And sometimes when I'm talking about them, my husband will say, they're not real, right? I'll be like, no, they are real. I spent, they lived with me like intimately in my brain for, you know, anywhere from 2 to 5 years plus. So I think about them all the time. And in fact, I even have in my brain, I go a few, you know, pages past where I end the book, and I create, you know, what happens next for my characters in my own head. So I have a whole, you know, what happened with Alice and Nate after that final page. Like there's a whole story about what happened with them. And I have emailed it out to people when they've asked before if they want it, because people are like, yes, I need to know what happens to them after this. So yeah, I actually, Nelly makes a cameo appearance in this next book I'm writing right now in 1975. So that was fun to be able to find a place for her. So yeah, I think about them a lot. And my debut, Come Away With Me, is very sad. And I think about those two a lot and what I did to them. If anyone's read the book, they know what I mean. But yeah, I think about them a lot. So yes, they live with you forever.
That's great. We're coming up to the hour now, so I'll just, is there any other questions? And Beth, did you want to, I know your Come Away With Me is her all-time favorite book, so maybe
I could see Beth doing this with her hand on her.
You can unmute, Beth. I know how much you want to and ask a question.
I have been putting my questions into the chat, and you've definitely been answering a lot that I had on my list. Yes, I have a list on my phone. Oh, do you have a favorite author that inspires your writing?
Ooh, I don't, I always feel badly saying favorite authors because I don't know, I will always leave people out, but Lauren Groff is one of my favorite authors. She wrote Fates and Furies, and her most recent was a short story collection called Florida. And I think she has another book coming out next year, which I'm very excited about. Meg Wolitzer is another one of my favorite authors. John Irving. I grew up reading John Irving, and I met him actually just the September before the pandemic. When was this? I can't even keep track anymore. September 2019. I met him at a publishing party because he's a Penguin Random House author as well. And that was like a highlight of my life. I mean, he was so nice. We chatted for maybe 20 minutes. He talked about his best friend, like his dear friend, Steve, who is Stephen King. You know, so yeah, I love Stephen King too. I think that, and Shirley Jackson is someone who, if you like Gothic horror, she's amazing. Even if you don't, you should read one of her books. She's just incredible. So I have so many favorites, but those are just a few of the ones who I always kind of go back to, you know, to reread. So yeah.
Well, Karma, that was fabulous. You answered so many questions, and thank you, Beth, because I didn't know those were your questions coming through. So thank you for all those wonderful questions. And yeah, so if there isn't any other questions, maybe we will wrap things up for tonight. And it's been a pleasure having you here. And I hope you come back after your next book. And I know I'll ask. So
no, I hope to be able to do that too. I mean, it will be a while from now, but
maybe it'll be live.
Yes, so, that would be nice. So,
but we'll keep doing this and inviting authors in whatever way we can, because we've had great feedback of it, and our book club loved your book. We had a great nostalgic discussion after about recipes and memories. So it created a really nice discussion. So thank you for that. And thanks for coming today, and all the people who joined us. So have a good night,
everyone. Yeah, thank you so much for all your questions and for having me tonight. It was really nice to chat with you.
Yeah, and I know everybody's giving you a big round of applause.
I can see it. I can see all the clapping. Yes. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great night, everyone.
Yes, take care.